They called him a killer, but the silent gunslinger carried the girl home instead of gold. The desert wind carried whispers of death through Redemption Creek, a dying town clinging to the edge of the Arizona territory like a wounded animal refusing to let go. Dust devils danced between abandoned storefronts where tumbleweeds had claimed more space than people, and the sun beat down mercilessly on cracked adobe walls that had seen better decades. Marcus Deadeye Whitmore rode into town just as the church bell struck noon, though half the town couldn't hear it anymore. They were either dead, drunk, or had long since fled to more prosperous settlements. His black stallion's hooves echoed against the weathered planks of the main street, each step announcing the arrival of a man whose reputation preceded him like a shadow at twilight. The few remaining townspeople who caught sight of him quickly ducked behind whatever cover they could find. Store owners pulled down their shutters with trembling hands. Mothers swept their children indoors, and even the saloon, usually the last bastion of brave fools and desperate men, fell silent as a tomb. They all knew the stories. 27 men had fallen to his guns, each death as clean and precise as a surgeon's cut. Some said he could draw faster than lightning could strike. Others whispered he'd sold his soul to the devil himself for that speed. But Marcus felt no pride in those whispers. Each name etched on his conscience weighed heavier than the twin Colt .45s holstered at his sides. The killing had started as justice, avenging his murdered family. But somewhere along the blood-soaked trail, justice had twisted into something darker, hungrier, something that left him hollow inside, wandering from town to town like a ghost searching for peace in all the wrong places. He'd come to Redemption Creek following rumors of the Crimson Hand Gang, the same butchers who'd left his wife and daughter bleeding in their Kansas farmhouse 3 years ago. Word was they'd holed up here, counting their spoils from a recent bank robbery in Tucson. Marcus had tracked them across half the territory, leaving a trail of bodies in his wake. Not innocents, but men who'd chosen the wrong side when given a choice between right and wrong. The general store stood at the town's heart, its painted sign so faded that only the word supplies remained legible. Marcus tied his horse to the hitching post and stepped onto the creaking porch, his spurs singing a metallic song that seemed to announce death itself. The door's hinges screamed as he pushed inside, and the musty smell of neglect filled his nostrils. Behind the counter stood an elderly man with shoulders bent by decades of hard living and harder choices. His weathered hands shook as he pretended to organize inventory that hadn't moved in months. When he finally looked up, his pale blue eyes held the resigned acceptance of a man who'd already made peace with mortality. We don't want no trouble, mister," the shopkeeper stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever you're after, we ain't got much, but you're welcome to it." Marcus touched the brim of his black hat in a gesture more polite than most expected from a man of his reputation. "Just information, old-timer. I'm looking for 5 men. They ride together, call themselves the Crimson Hand. One's got a scar running from his left ear to his jaw. Another's missing 2 fingers on his right hand." The shopkeeper's face went white as desert sand. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard, and his eyes darted toward the back room before returning to Marcus with obvious terror. "Can't say I seen nobody like that, mister. Mostly just locals come through here nowadays." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Marcus could read deception in a man's posture the same way he could read the weather in cloud formations. The way the old man's weight shifted to his left foot, the barely perceptible glance toward the rear of the store, the tremor in his voice that wasn't entirely fear, all told the story of men who'd been here recently, men who'd made threats and demanded silence. "They've been through here," Marcus stated quietly, his hand resting casually near his gun. "Question is whether you're protecting them out of loyalty or fear." Before the shopkeeper could answer, a sound drifted from the back room, the soft whimper of someone in distress, quickly muffled but unmistakably human. Marcus's entire body tensed, his instincts honed by years of violence suddenly alert to danger that had nothing to do with the trembling man before him. "What was that?" "Nothing, mister, just my cat. Old Tom's been sick lately." Another lie, and this one made Marcus's jaw clench. The sound came again, clearer this time, definitely female, definitely afraid. His hand moved to his gun grip, fingers finding the familiar worn leather that had seen more draws than he cared to count. "Step aside, old man." "Please, mister. They'll kill me if—" The words died in his throat as Marcus drew his weapon in one fluid motion. The barrel coming to rest pointed at the shopkeeper's chest. There was no malice in the gesture, no anger, just the cold efficiency of a man who'd learned that sometimes kindness required the threat of violence. I said, "Step aside." The shopkeeper stumbled backward, knocking over a display of canned goods that clattered to the floor like brass cartridges. Marcus moved toward the back room, his footsteps measured and deliberate. Each board creaked under his weight, announcing his approach to whatever waited beyond that door. He could hear voices now. Rough, masculine laughter mixed with pleading that made his blood run cold. It was the sound of predators toying with prey, of men who'd forgotten that cruelty was a choice rather than a necessity. Marcus had heard it before, in his own farmhouse on that terrible night when his world had ended in screams and gunfire. The door was slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of the room beyond. Through the gap, Marcus could see movement. The flash of a red bandana, the glint of sunlight on metal, the crimson hands' trademark scarlet cloth that had earned them their name, usually worn around the neck like a badge of dishonor. He pressed his back against the wall beside the doorframe and listened. 3 voices, maybe 4. One was pleading, young and female, begging them to let her go. The others were rough with desert living and harder with violence, discussing her like she was livestock to be bartered or broken. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment and felt the familiar weight of decision settling on his shoulders. He could walk away. The smart play would be to wait, track them to their hideout, face them on ground of his choosing rather than trapped in a cramped room where ricochets could kill the innocent as easily as the guilty. But the pleading voice reminded him of another voice, 3 years and a lifetime ago. His daughter's voice calling for her papa as evil men did evil things. He'd been too late then, arriving home to find only blood and silence. This time would be different. Marcus kicked open the door. The room erupted into chaos the moment Marcus's boot connected with the door. 4 men spun toward him, hands diving for weapons with the desperate speed of rattlesnakes sensing danger. But Marcus had already calculated their positions, their likely reactions, the angles of fire that would keep the girl alive. His first shot took down Jake Scarface Morrison before the outlaw's gun cleared leather. The bullet caught him center mass, spinning him around to crash into a stack of grain sacks that burst open in a cloud of wheat dust. The second shot found Tommy, 3-finger, Walsh as he tried to use an overturned table for cover, the .45 slug punching through the thin wood like paper and dropping him where he crouched. The remaining 2, brothers named Pete and Danny Keller, had managed to draw their weapons, but panic made them sloppy. Pete's shot went wide, splintering the doorframe inches from Marcus's head. Danny never got the chance to fire. Marcus's third bullet caught him in the shoulder, sending his gun spinning across the floor as he screamed and clutched at the wound. Pete, seeing his brother fall, made the mistake of looking away from Marcus for just an instant. It was enough. The 4th shot took him in the chest and he crumpled beside a pile of rope that was stained dark with what Marcus prayed wasn't blood. The entire gunfight had lasted perhaps 10 seconds. 4 men down, 3 dead, 1 wounded but no longer a threat. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air, mixing with the metallic scent of blood and the girl's terrified sobs. Marcus holstered his smoking weapon and turned his attention to her for the first time. She was huddled in the corner, her hands bound behind her back with rough hemp rope, her blue dress torn at the shoulder and stained with dirt. Auburn hair fell across her face in tangles, but when she looked up at him, Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced since before his family's death. Her eyes were green as spring grass after rain, wide with terror, but holding a spark of defiance that hadn't been broken despite whatever these animals had put her through. She couldn't have been more than 20, with the kind of natural beauty that belonged in church pews and parlor rooms, not tied up in the back of a dying frontier store. "Easy now," Marcus said softly, holstering his gun and raising his hands to show he meant no harm. His voice so often used to deliver ultimatums and threats, gentle to something almost tender. "You're safe. They can't hurt you anymore." She flinched when he approached, pressing herself further into the corner. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse from screaming. "I don't have any money. My father, he's just a preacher. We don't have anything worth taking." Marcus knelt slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. From his boot, he drew a small knife and showed it to her. "I'm going to cut those ropes. Just the ropes, nothing else. I give you my word." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because she nodded and turned to present her bound wrists. The rope had been tied cruelly tight, cutting into her skin until it was raw and bleeding. Marcus cursed under his breath at the sight, not the casual profanity of a hard man, but the genuine anger of someone witnessing unnecessary cruelty. "What's your name?" he asked as he carefully sawed through the bonds, trying to keep his rough hands from touching her skin any more than necessary. "Sarah," she whispered. "Sarah Beth Morrison. My father is Reverend Morrison from Cedar Falls. These men, they took me 3 days ago when I was walking home from the schoolhouse where I teach." The ropes fell away, and Sarah rubbed her wrists gingerly, trying to restore circulation. Marcus offered her his canteen, and she drank gratefully, water spilling down her chin as her shaking hand struggled to hold it steady. "Cedar Falls," Marcus repeated, his mind already calculating distances and routes. "That's 4 days' hard ride north of here. Your family must be worried sick." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "My mother died 2 years ago. It's just Papa and me. He must think—" She couldn't finish the thought, but Marcus understood. In a small town, when a young woman disappeared for 3 days in the company of known criminals, people assumed the worst. From the front of the store came the shopkeeper's trembling voice. "Mister, everything all right back there?" "Stay put, old man," Marcus called back. He looked down at Sarah, noting the exhaustion in her face, the way she favored her left ankle. "Can you walk?" She tried to stand and immediately swayed, catching herself against the wall. "I think so. They kept me tied up most of the time. My legs feel like they're full of pins and needles." Marcus stood and offered her his arm for support. She hesitated only a moment before accepting it, her small hand surprisingly strong as it gripped his forearm. Together they made their way through the carnage toward the front of the store. The shopkeeper's eyes widened as they emerged from the back room, first at the sight of Sarah, disheveled but alive, then at the grim satisfaction on Marcus's face. "Jesus and Mary," the old man breathed. "You killed them all? 4 less pieces of trash in the world?" Marcus replied without emotion. "You might want to get the undertaker, and send word to the sheriff, though I'll be long gone by the time he gets here." Sarah looked up at him sharply. "Gone? But you saved me. Surely that counts for something with the law." Marcus's smile was bitter as desert wind. "Miss Morrison, the law doesn't much care about my reasons for killing, only that I keep doing it. My name is Marcus Whitmore, and I'm wanted in 3 territories for murder." The color drained from her face as recognition dawned. Even in a small town like Cedar Falls, the name Deadeye Whitmore would be known. The shopkeeper actually took a step backward, as if proximity to Marcus might somehow contaminate him with violence. You're the gunslinger," Sarah whispered. "The one they say can't be killed." "I'm a man who's killed too many other men," Marcus corrected. "And if you're smart, Miss Morrison, you'll wait here for the next sheriff's posse while I ride out alone." But even as he said it, Marcus was calculating the dangers of leaving her behind. The Crimson Hand had friends, allies, other gangs who might see a rescued witness as loose ends that needed tying up, and the nearest law enforcement was probably days away, leaving her vulnerable to anyone else who might ride through looking for easy prey. Sarah seemed to be thinking the same thing. "How far to Cedar Falls from here?" she asked. 4 days if you push hard, 5 or 6 if you take it easy. "And how long before another gang might come looking for their friends?" Marcus studied her face, seeing intelligence behind the fear. She understood the reality of their situation better than most frontier women would. "Could be hours, could be never. But I wouldn't bet your life on never." The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of an impossible decision. Outside, Marcus's horse nickered impatiently, eager to be moving again. The desert sun was beginning its descent toward evening, painting the dusty street in shades of gold and amber. Finally, Sarah straightened her shoulders with a determination that reminded Marcus painfully of his late wife. "Then I guess you'll have to take me with you, Mr. Whitmore, because I'm not staying here to find out which one of us is right." Marcus stared at her for a long moment, recognizing the stubborn set of her jaw. He'd seen that expression before, in mirrors and in memories. It was the look of someone who'd already made up their mind, regardless of common sense or safer alternatives. "Miss Morrison," he said quietly, "traveling with me is about the most dangerous thing you could do. I've got enemies from here to California, and they don't much care about innocent bystanders. And staying here alone is the second most dangerous thing I could do, she replied. At least with you, I know you're fast enough to keep us both alive. The setting sun painted the desert in shades of blood and gold as Marcus helped Sarah onto his horse, her injured ankle making it difficult for her to mount alone. She settled behind him on the stallion, her arms wrapping tentatively around his waist for balance. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through Marcus. It had been 3 years since another human being had touched him with anything other than violence or fear. Hold on tight, he said, his voice rougher than he'd intended. We need to put distance between us and this place before word spreads. They rode hard for the first hour, following a narrow canyon trail that wound between red sandstone walls like a scar across the desert floor. The horse's hooves echoed off the rocky surfaces, creating a rhythm that seemed to match the beating of Marcus's heart. Behind him, Sarah remained silent, though he could feel the tension in her grip whenever the trail grew treacherous. As twilight deepened into true darkness, Marcus finally allowed them to slow to a walking pace. Stars emerged overhead like scattered diamonds, providing just enough light to navigate by. The desert night was surprisingly cold after the blazing heat of day, and he felt Sarah shiver against his back. We'll make camp soon, he said, scanning the landscape for a defensible position. There's a box canyon about a mile ahead where we can build a small fire without being seen. Mr. Whitmore, Sarah said, her voice barely audible over the horse's steady breathing. Those men back there, they said things about what they planned to do to me, about what they'd already done to other women. She paused, gathering courage. They said you were hunting them, that you'd been tracking them for months. Marcus's jaw tightened. They killed my family 3 years ago in Kansas, burned my farm, murdered my wife and daughter while I was in town buying supplies for winter. The words came out flat, emotionless, but Sarah could feel the tension in his shoulders. I've been hunting them ever since, and now you've found them. 4 of them anyway. The leader, Ezra Bloodhound Jackson, wasn't with this group. He's the one I really want, the one who put the knife to my little girl's throat. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, processing this information. When she spoke again, her voice held a new understanding. That's why you saved me, not because you're some noble hero, but because you saw your daughter in me. Marcus reined in the horse so abruptly that Sarah nearly slid off. He turned in the saddle to look at her, his gray eyes reflecting starlight like chips of ice. What kind of man do you think I am, Miss Morrison? She met his gaze steadily. No longer the terrified victim he'd rescued, but a woman trying to understand the complex man who'd become her unlikely protector. I think you're a man who's forgotten the difference between justice and revenge. But I also think there's still something good in you, something those animals couldn't kill. You're wrong. Marcus turned back around and urged the horse forward. The good in me died with my family. What's left is just a weapon pointed at the men who destroyed everything I loved. They found the box canyon just as Marcus had promised. A narrow opening between 2 towering rock faces that widened into a sheltered space about the size of a small church. A thin stream trickled down one wall, creating a tiny pool before disappearing into the sandy ground. It was perfect for their needs, hidden, defensible, and with fresh water. Marcus helped Sarah down from the horse, noticing how she winced when her injured ankle touched the ground. While he tended to the stallion, unsaddling, brushing, and hobbling the animal so it couldn't wander, Sarah gathered small pieces of driftwood and dried grass for kindling. Soon they had a modest fire crackling in a ring of stones, its light dancing off the canyon walls but invisible to anyone outside their hidden sanctuary. Marcus shared his meager supplies: jerky, hardtack, and coffee that was more grounds than liquid. It wasn't much, but it was the first real meal Sarah had eaten in 3 days. Tell me about your family, she said as they sat across from each other, the fire between them like a barrier against the darkness. Your wife and daughter. Marcus's hand stilled on his coffee cup. Most people were smart enough not to ask about his past, sensing the danger in probing too deeply into a killer's wounds. But something in Sarah's voice, genuine curiosity rather than morbid fascination, made him consider answering. Mary was her name. My wife. Met her at a church social in Abilene when I was just a cowhand trying to make enough money to buy my own spread. His voice softened despite himself. Prettiest girl in 3 counties and smart as a whip. Could quote scripture and Shakespeare in the same breath and made apple pie that could make grown men weep with joy. Sarah smiled at the image. And your daughter? Emma. She was 7 when they... Marcus stopped, his throat suddenly tight. Red hair like her mama's, but with my stubborn streak. Always asking questions, always getting into trouble. She wanted to be a schoolteacher just like you. The comparison hung in the air between them, explaining so much about Marcus's protective instincts. Sarah reached across the fire and touched his hand gently. She sounds wonderful. Marcus pulled his hand away as if her touch burned. Don't. Don't what? Don't try to make me human again. It won't work, and it'll only get you hurt. He stood abruptly, pacing to the edge of their small camp. I should have left you in town. This was a mistake. Sarah watched him struggle with emotions he'd buried beneath years of violence and isolation. Why did you become a gunfighter, Mr. Whitmore? Before your family died, I mean. I wasn't. I was a farmer, nothing more. Never drew on a man in anger until that night I came home and found... He trailed off, staring into the darkness beyond the canyon walls. The first man I killed was one of Jackson's boys, drunk in a saloon in Dodge City. I'd been tracking them for 2 months, and there he was, bragging about the family they'd burned out in Kansas. What happened? He went for his gun. I was faster. Marcus's voice was flat again, drained of emotion. Word got out that I'd killed Iron Pete Donovan in a fair fight. Suddenly, every 2-bit gunslinger west of the Mississippi wanted to try their luck against the farmer who'd gotten lucky. But you kept winning. I kept surviving. Each fight taught me something new, made me a little bit faster, a little bit deadlier. And each dead man brought me closer to the animals who'd destroyed my world. He turned back to face her, firelight playing across his weathered features. That's who I am now, Miss Morrison. Not a hero, not a savior. Just a killer, hunting other killers. Sarah considered this for a long moment, studying the man across from her. Despite his words, despite the reputation that preceded him like a shadow, she saw something else in his eyes, a deep weariness, a longing for peace that he'd convinced himself was beyond reach. What will you do when you find this Ezra Jackson? She asked quietly. Kill him. And after that, the question seemed to surprise him. Marcus had spent 3 years focused entirely on revenge, never looking beyond the moment when he would finally face his family's murderer. The idea of an after was as foreign to him as the concept of mercy. I hadn't thought about it, he admitted. Maybe it's time you did. Sarah pulled her torn shawl closer around her shoulders against the desert chill. Because I don't think your wife and daughter would want you to spend the rest of your life as a weapon. They'd want you to live, to find some kind of peace. Marcus was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he might not respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Peace isn't for men like me. Too much blood on my hands, too many ghosts following in my wake. There's always a choice, Mr. Whitmore. Always a chance to become something different. Is that what you think this is? Marcus gestured between them. Some kind of redemption story, where the killer finds his soul through saving an innocent woman? Sarah smiled, and for the first time since her ordeal began, it reached her eyes. I think this is a story about 2 people trying to find their way home. The difference is I still know where mine is. The fire crackled between them, sending sparks up into the star-filled sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, a lonesome sound that seemed to echo Marcus's own isolation. He looked across the flames at this remarkable woman who'd managed to see past his reputation to something he'd thought was dead and buried. For the first time in 3 years, Marcus Whitmore began to wonder if there might be life after revenge. Dawn broke over the desert like a promise of redemption, painting the canyon walls in shades of rose and gold. Marcus had slept fitfully, one hand never far from his gun, ears tuned to every sound that might signal approaching danger. Sarah had curled up near the dying embers of their fire, using his spare blanket despite his protests that he didn't need it. Watching her sleep, her face peaceful in the early morning light, Marcus felt something crack inside the armor he'd built around his heart. They broke camp quickly, sharing the last of his coffee and splitting a piece of hardtack that was tough enough to sole boots. Sarah's ankle was better after a night's rest, though she still favored it when she thought he wasn't looking. The ride ahead would be long and difficult, 4 days through territory that grew more dangerous with each passing mile. We'll follow the old mining trails, Marcus explained as he helped her onto the horse. Longer route, but less likely to run into trouble. The main road between here and Cedar Falls runs right through Crimson Rock Canyon, and that's where Jackson likes to set up ambushes. Sarah settled behind him, her arms once again encircling his waist. The contact felt less foreign today, almost natural, though Marcus tried not to think about what that might mean. "Have you been to Cedar Falls before?" she asked. "Once, about 2 years ago, following a lead on the gang that turned out to be nothing." He guided the stallion out of the canyon and onto a barely visible trail that wound between sagebrush and scattered boulders. "Nice little town. Good people, from what I could tell." "It is," Sarah agreed, and he could hear the homesickness in her voice. "Papa built the church himself when we first arrived, back when I was just 12. The whole town pitched in. Even the saloon owner donated lumber and nails." She was quiet for a moment, then added, "I hope they haven't given up on me." "They haven't." Marcus's voice carried a certainty that surprised them both. A town doesn't invest that much in building something without learning to fight for what's worth keeping. They rode in comfortable silence for several hours, the desert gradually giving way to rolling hills dotted with scrub oak and juniper trees. The sun climbed higher, but clouds had moved in during the night, providing welcome relief from the usual brutal heat. By midday, they'd reached a small creek where Marcus called a halt to rest the horse and refill their water containers. Sarah slid down from the stallion with considerably more grace than she'd shown the night before. While Marcus tended to the animal, she walked carefully to the creek's edge and knelt to splash cool water on her face and hands. When she looked up, she found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What is it?" she asked. "You're different today. Stronger." He moved to crouch beside her at the water's edge, filling his canteen. "Yesterday you were a victim. Today you're just a woman traveling home." Sarah considered this, recognizing the truth in his observation. "Maybe being around you is rubbing off on me, teaching me that survival isn't just about waiting for someone else to save you. That's a dangerous lesson for a preacher's daughter." "Is it?" She met his eyes directly. "Seems to me the Bible is full of people who had to fight for what they believed in. David and Goliath, Joshua and Jericho, Jesus clearing the money changers from the temple. Sometimes survival requires action, not just faith." Marcus found himself almost smiling, an expression that felt strange and unfamiliar on his face. "You might be the first person who's ever compared me to biblical heroes. I didn't compare you to them. I just said that sometimes good people have to do hard things." Sarah stood and brushed dust from her torn dress. "The question is, what happens when the hard thing is done? Do you become the thing you fought against, or do you find your way back to who you were meant to be?" Before Marcus could respond, a sound drifted across the water. The distant but unmistakable sound of hoofbeats, multiple horses moving at speed. His entire body tensed, hand instinctively moving toward his gun as he scanned the horizon for riders. "Get behind that boulder," he said quietly, his voice carrying the hard edge of a man preparing for violence. "And whatever happens, don't come out until I tell you it's safe." Sarah didn't argue. She'd seen what Marcus could do when threatened, and she trusted his instincts more than her own in matters of survival. She pressed herself against the large rock he'd indicated, trying to make herself invisible while still maintaining a view of the trail. The riders appeared moments later, 3 men on lathered horses pushing their mounts harder than wise in the afternoon heat. Marcus recognized the type immediately. Bounty hunters, probably tracking the rumors of gunfights and dead outlaws that followed him like a plague. They wore the mixed clothing of men who lived by violence, parts military surplus, parts stolen finery, all practical and well-armed. The lead rider raised his hand to signal a halt when he spotted Marcus standing beside the creek. He was a lean man with a carefully waxed mustache and eyes that missed nothing. A badge was pinned to his vest. Not official law enforcement, but the kind of tin star that bounty hunters sometimes wore to give themselves the appearance of authority. "Well, well," the man said, his voice carrying a slight accent that might have been Texas or Arkansas. "Marcus Whitmore himself been looking for you, killer. Then you found me." Marcus stood relaxed but ready, his gun hand loose at his side. "What do you want, Thornton?" The bounty hunter's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You know me? Should I be flattered? Your reputation for taking wanted men dead rather than alive isn't exactly secret." Marcus's voice was calm, conversational, but Sarah could see the tension coiled in his shoulders. "Question is whether you're smart enough to realize that some men are wanted alive for good reasons." Thornton laughed, a sound like gravel in a can. $3,000 dead or alive. That's what the territorial governor is offering for the famous Deadeye Whitmore. My associates and I are prepared to collect. The other two riders had spread out slightly, trying to create crossfire angles. Standard bounty hunter tactics, but Marcus had faced worse odds with men who were faster draws. What worried him wasn't the fight itself, but Sarah's safety. Stray bullets had no respect for innocence or good intentions. "You boys might want to reconsider," Marcus said, his voice dropping to the deadly quiet tone that experienced gunfighters learn to recognize. "I've got business in Cedar Falls and I don't have time to dig 3 more graves today." Big talk from one man facing 3. Thornton's hand moved toward his weapon. "Boys, when I give the word, Mr. Thornton," Sarah's voice cut across the tension like a church bell on Sunday morning. She stepped out from behind the boulder, ignoring Marcus's sharp intake of breath. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." All 3 bounty hunters turned toward her in surprise, their attention momentarily divided. It was exactly what Marcus had hoped wouldn't happen. Sarah putting herself at risk to protect him. "Well, hello there, pretty lady," Thornton said, his tone shifting to something Sarah recognized and despised. "Didn't see you there. You this killer's woman?" "I'm Sarah Morrison, daughter of Reverend Morrison from Cedar Falls," she said with quiet dignity. "And Mr. Whitmore isn't a killer. He's the man who saved my life from the Crimson Hand Gang 3 days ago." Thornton's expression flickered with uncertainty. The Crimson Hand was known throughout the territory, and their reputation for brutality toward women was part of their legend. A rescue story might complicate the simple narrative of hunting down a wanted murderer. "That's a touching tale, miss, but it doesn't change the fact that your protector here has 27 confirmed kills to his name. And how many of those men were trying to kill him first?" Sarah stepped closer, putting herself dangerously in the line of potential fire. "How many were outlaws and murderers themselves? When did defending yourself become a crime worth $3,000? Marcus watched this exchange with growing amazement. Sarah was doing something he'd never seen before, humanizing him, making these men see him as more than just a target worth money. It was a tactic he'd never considered, because he'd long ago stopped thinking of himself as human. The bounty hunter's confidence was wavering, but greed and pride are powerful motivators. "Doesn't matter who they were, lady. Law says he's wanted and we aim to collect." "Then the law is wrong." Sarah's voice carried the authority of a woman raised in the church, accustomed to speaking truth to power. "And if you try to take him, you'll have to go through me first." The standoff stretched like a taut rope. 4 armed men and 1 unarmed woman balanced on the knife's edge of violence. Marcus felt time slowing, his perception sharpening to that crystalline clarity that preceded gunfights. He could hear Sarah's breathing, see the sweat beading on Thornton's forehead, track the nervous fidgeting of the other 2 riders. But something else was happening, something that had never occurred in any of his previous confrontations. He was thinking not just about survival, but about protecting Sarah, about getting her home safely to her father and her teaching position and her life of quiet purpose. For the first time in 3 years, Marcus Whitmore had something to lose besides his own life. "Last chance, boys," he said quietly. "Ride away and we all live to see another sunset." Thornton's hand twitched toward his gun, and Marcus knew the decision had been made. But as his own weapon cleared leather with the speed that had made him legend, he saw Sarah throw herself sideways, away from the potential crossfire, trusting him to keep her safe. 3 shots echoed across the desert so close together they sounded almost like one. When the gun smoke cleared, Thornton and his men lay sprawled beside the creek, their greed and ambition silenced forever. Marcus stood untouched, his smoking Colt already returning to its holster. Sarah rose slowly from where she'd taken cover, her eyes wide but not with fear, with something closer to awe. "How do you do that?" she whispered. Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved quickly to check the bodies, ensuring no threats remained. When he was satisfied, he turned back to find Sarah watching him with an expression he'd never seen before. Not fear, not revulsion, but something approaching understanding. "Practice," he finally said. "More practice than any man should need." They gathered their supplies in silence, both shaken by how quickly violence had found them despite their efforts to avoid civilization. As Marcus helped Sarah back onto the horse, she spoke quietly in his ear. "3 more graves you didn't want to dig." "No choice," he replied, but there was regret in his voice. "They wouldn't let it go." "I know." Sarah settled behind him, her arms encircling his waist with a familiarity that spoke of trust earned through shared danger. But someday there will be a choice. Someday you'll be able to walk away instead of drawing your gun. As they rode away from the creek and its fresh graves, Marcus found himself hoping she was right. The road to Cedar Falls stretched ahead of them, still 3 days of hard travel through dangerous country. But for the first time since this journey began, he wasn't thinking about the dangers behind them or the vengeance that had driven him for 3 years. He was thinking about getting Sarah home safely, about the moment when he would see her reunited with her father, about the look of joy and relief that would replace the worry that must be consuming the old preacher. It was a small thing, perhaps, in the grand scheme of his blood-soaked quest for justice. But as the afternoon sun broke through the clouds ahead of them, Marcus began to understand that sometimes the smallest acts of decency could cast the longest shadows. The desert was giving way to grassland now, and in the distance, barely visible against the horizon, stood the church spire of Cedar Falls. Home was still days away, but it was finally within sight. And for both the silent gunslinger and the preacher's daughter riding behind him, that made all the difference in the world. As they crested a small hill, Sarah tightened her arms around Marcus's waist and whispered, "Thank you for everything." Marcus didn't respond with words, but his free hand briefly covered hers where they rested against his chest. It was a small gesture, barely noticeable, but it carried the weight of 3 years' worth of buried humanity, finally fighting its way back to the surface. Behind them, the desert wind began to cover their tracks, erasing the evidence of their passage like time itself washing away the sins of the past. Ahead lay Cedar Falls, and home, and the possibility, however fragile, of redemption for a man who'd forgotten he deserved it. The story of the silent gunslinger was far from over, but perhaps, just perhaps, the story of Marcus Whitmore was finally ready to begin again. What did you think of Marcus and Sarah's incredible journey through the Old West? Did this tale of redemption and unexpected love capture your heart the way it did ours? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us your favorite moment from their story, whether you think Marcus truly found his path to redemption, or if you'd like to see more stories like this one. If you enjoyed this emotional roller coaster of gunfights, romance, and second chances, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more captivating tales from America's frontier days. Your support helps us bring these unforgettable stories to life, and trust us, we've got plenty more adventures waiting in the wings that will keep you on the edge of your seat.